Hey guys, as we wind down tonight, we step softly onto the cold stones of a Roman street, just after sunset. The lamps burn low, casting long shadows across marble facades and chipped statues. The air smells faintly of olive oil, wet limestone, and whatever punishment is currently echoing from the Forum. You aren't here for a triumphal parade. Not tonight. There are no emperors waving, no generals returning. Just the quiet, slightly bureaucratic horror of ancient justice. You think you've arrived in the golden age of logic and reason, and maybe you have, but reason, it turns out, has a funny way of showing itself when it involves a live dog, a sack, a chicken, and a rather unfortunate man with bad timing and worse citizenship status. This isn't a tale of gladiators and bloodied arenas. We'll leave that to the historians with stronger stomachs. No, this is a slower, quieter descent into Roman punishment, as seen through the slightly cracked lens of ritual, superstition, and an empire that really liked public consequences. Executions as political theatre, trials as moral plays, chickens as state witnesses. You might not survive this one, especially if you're afraid of snakes or bureaucracy. So, before you settle in, feel free to give the video a like and hit subscribe if you're truly enjoying the journey. You can also leave a comment. Let me know where you're listening from and what time it is there. It's always a small wonder to see people tuning in from so many corners of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that gentle hum in the background, and together, let's ease into tonight's story. You didn't plan on getting in trouble. Not really. Maybe you said the wrong thing about a magistrate's sandals. Maybe you knocked over a statue while drunk on cheap Falernian wine. Or maybe, and this is most likely, you stole something stupid. A handful of figs. A scrap of copper. Something so small you almost laugh about it, until someone whistles, someone points, and suddenly you're face down in the street with a sandal pressing your cheek into gravel. Because in Rome, minor crimes weren't treated with minor irritation. They were handled like public decorum had just collapsed into the Tiber. You thought maybe you'd be scolded, maybe a fine. Instead, you'll march through the street like a prize goose, arms bound, tunic stained with a stain you really hope is wine. Roman justice isn't blind. It's staring right at you, unimpressed and already bored. You get dragged to the aedile, the public magistrate, who spends half his time inspecting grain prices and the other half inventing punishments for people like you. He's not angry. He's just tired. Tired of petty thieves, drunk poets, and anyone who can't mind their business for 5 minutes. You explain. He doesn't care. You offer to pay. He rolls his eyes. And then, without looking up from his wax tablet, he sentences you. Not to prison. Rome doesn't really do prisons, but to something far more humiliating, public punishment. This could be anything. Maybe the furca, a wooden yoke clamped to your neck and shoulders. You're paraded through town like a half-finished coat rack while children throw olive pits at your knees. Maybe they brand your forehead with the letter F for fur. Thief, a nice permanent souvenir of your day's mistake. Or maybe it's lashes. Not dramatic, movie-style lashes, but the dry, crackling kind, methodical, delivered in front of a crowd who cheer with the enthusiasm of people thankful it isn't them. You thought Roman civilization meant baths, poetry, and democracy. It does. But it also means being beaten by a man who just cleaned the streets yesterday and now has a badge. You're learning that Roman order isn't about fairness. It's about spectacle, consistency, and the careful maintenance of social shame. Justice here is less about resolution and more about reinforcement of hierarchy, control, and how loudly your neighbors can laugh. And it gets worse. Because tomorrow, even if your back still stings and your dignity limps behind you, you're expected to get back to work. There's no recuperation. No day off. You wear your punishment like a scarf, visible, itchy, and impossible to explain away. You think maybe no one saw. No, everyone saw. That's the point. Punishment here is like street theatre, but with less applause and more spitting. There's no curtain call, just a slow walk home past the same people who now call you infamis, literally someone who's lost their reputation, legal standing, and maybe their job sweeping the atrium. So yes, you stole a fig, And now you've paid for it with pain, branding, and a lifetime supply of awkward silences at family dinners. Because in Rome, justice is public, punishment is performative, and even the smallest crime can turn into a full-blown civic drama starring you, the unfortunate idiot with poor impulse control and an empty stomach. You think the worst is over after the lashings. But you'd be wrong. Because in Rome, punishment didn't end with pain, it continued with paperwork. Not literal paperwork, of course. They weren't handing out carbon copies. But records were made. Names were noted. Offences were etched into memory, shouted through alleys, and sometimes posted on public walls like angry Yelp reviews. You don't just pay the price once. You pay it every time someone glances your way and remembers exactly what you did on Saturnalia after 4 cups of mixed wine and a very bad idea. The Romans loved structure. Columns, roads, philosophies, and yes, their system of fines. If your crime wasn't quite lash-worthy but still annoying enough to be noticed, you might be fined. You imagine this as a polite civic exchange. A measured fee. A chance to walk away with dignity. It isn't. The fines are absurd. Steal a cloak. That's 2 goats worth of silver. Damage a neighbour's vine. That's 20. Accidentally insult someone who owns more than you do. Congratulations, that'll cost a year's wages and your ability to make eye contact in public for the next decade. And if you can't pay? Simple. Public humiliation. There's the sippus, a low stone post you're chained to in the forum, usually for the duration of a market day. You stand there like a badly designed statue while locals walk past and judge you in real time. They don't yell. They don't need to. The silence of a disapproving Roman widow is more devastating than any curse. Or maybe you're made to sweep the forum with a basket tied to your waist and a sign explaining your offence: I sold watered-down wine. Or, I lied about my neighbour's turnips. Justice, it seems, has a flair for both the theatrical and the oddly specific. The punishments weren't meant to break bones. They were designed to break your pride slowly, consistently, and often with the help of a very judgmental crowd of pensioners who had nowhere else to be and nothing better to do than critique your posture. You thought public punishment would involve crowds shouting insults, but no, it's worse. It's quiet. It's the merchant who used to greet you, now looking through you. The friend who decides not to wave. The child who mimics your chained posture with a giggle. The butcher who starts charging you more for offcuts. It's not a punishment. It's an ecosystem of humiliation, a small social snowball that rolls until you've been erased from dinner invitations, temple festivals, and even the better communal toilets. Eventually the punishment ends. The chain comes off. The sign is removed. The fine maybe is paid. But the damage, it lingers. Your name enters the unspoken registry of people who've disappointed the Republic, not enough to be exiled, but just enough to be permanently uninvited. And just when you think it's over, truly over, your laundry goes missing. Not stolen, not lost. Just deliberately left uncollected by the washer. A quiet little message that even your tunic has social consequences. You assume justice is doled out by officials, robed men with scrolls, maybe a few soldiers, the occasional bored senator doodling in the margins. But in Rome, justice often comes from the crowd. Not handed down, but shouted, pointed, and decided by volume. You aren't sentenced in silence. You're sentenced in a roar. Sometimes with words. Sometimes with rotten vegetables. Sometimes, worst of all, with an unsettling collective smirk. Take the infamia verdict. Not an official charge, not even a court ruling. Just a slow social death announced by the people. You might be a freedman who misbehaved, an actor who offended the wrong patron, or simply someone who lost too many public arguments in the bathhouse. Suddenly, your name appears on no guest lists. Your voice is not trusted in court. You may technically be free, but the forums echo with your absence louder than your footsteps ever did. You thought you were climbing. Turns out you were being watched. And then there are the entertainments. Not the grand amphitheatres, not the marble bleachers filled with senators leaning on gilded canes. No, this is smaller, crueler. A pop-up punishment. You're dragged into a plaza. and the people are already gathering like seagulls at a fish stall. Some don't even ask what you did. It doesn't matter. The presence of a rope, a stick, or an official with a scroll means something mildly scandalous is about to happen. And who could resist that on a Wednesday? The official reads your name. The crowd mutters. Someone spits. The sentence? Sub-corona public shaming under a crown. Not a regal one. Not gold. This is made of thorns, or maybe garlic, or occasionally, and this is very Roman, fish bones woven with leather straps. You're marched through town wearing it while children chant rhymes and bakers pretend not to see you. Except they do. Everyone does. Your head itches. Your pride itches more. You imagined the punishment would be formal. Instead, it's improv theatre with vegetables. You might be tied to a pillar and made to recite your offence. Aloud. Again and again. I lied about the grain weights. I refused to pay the tax on sea salt. I claimed to be a citizen and wasn't. The repetition isn't for legal clarity. It's for embarrassment. A loop of regret performed in front of neighbours who now know your crimes, your voice, and how squeaky you get when nervous. And if the crowd likes the show, they might cheer. If not, you get tomatoes, or worse, silence. That dreadful, disapproving Roman silence, colder than marble and heavier than debt. You thought mockery would be loud, but mockery, Roman style, is a slow blink and a turned back. Even when they untie you, the real ropes remain. Invisible ones. You walk differently now. Avoid eye contact. Laugh softer. Trust fewer people. You haven't just been punished. You've been rewritten. Not by a judge, but by the crowd, one sidelong glance at a time. You might think the toilet is where your problems end. In Rome, it's where they begin. You head to the latrina, hoping for a quiet moment to recover from public shame. Instead, you walk into a stone bench with holes and no walls. A room full of strangers, all sitting in contemplative misery discussing weather, politics, and that one guy who got fined for selling fish that weren't dead yet. The air smells of vinegar, old gods, and damp regret. There is no privacy. There is no relief. And if you're a known offender, there's also no mercy. Because here, in the most undignified space in the empire, justice has its own back door. You sit carefully, very carefully. The holes are carved stone cold, impersonal, and suspiciously slippery. You expected solitude. You got a forum with plumbing. You expected silence. You got commentary. Someone recognizes you. Not from friendship, but from yesterday's punishment parade. They remember your garlic crown. They ask, too loudly, if you plan to commit fraud again, or if you've taken up weaving to pass the time between disgrace and death. The worst part, you can't leave. Not immediately. This is a one-way trip, and the exit depends on your stomach cooperating. So you sit, and you listen. And now, you're part of a ritual more humiliating than any flogging. The Roman toilet where social status sits one crack away from collapse. If you've recently been punished, the consequences follow you here. The sponge on a stick shared, rinsed in vinegar, and passed along like some unholy torch may be withheld. The bucket of water, normally offered out of grim courtesy, suddenly gets forgotten. Your fellow citizens look at you not with scorn, but with amusement. You're not a person here. You're a punchline with pants down. You assume justice was finished when the fine was paid or the lashes stopped. But Romans believed shame should echo, and what better chamber for echoes than a public lavatory carved into stone? The graffiti doesn't help either. Someone's scrawled your name with a donkey beside it. Someone else has drawn something even ruder. You're not sure if it's a horse or a commentary on your family tree. Either way, it sticks in your mind longer than it should. Eventually you stand up slower than usual, soul slightly lighter, pride considerably heavier. You make your way out, and one of the old men nods, just once. A small sign that maybe, the worst is over. You believe it. Then you look down. The hem of your tunic has dragged through something it shouldn't have. Of course it has. You thought punishment was loud and dramatic. Turns out, it's quiet, persistent, and occasionally microbial. The toilet was supposed to be neutral ground. But nothing is neutral when your reputation stinks worse than the sponge bucket. You leave hoping no one else notices. They do. They always do, Rome remembers. Even in the lavatory. You've served your sentence. Or so you thought. The lashing healed. The fines were paid. Your pride now fits into a very small box, and you're quietly trying to move on. But Rome isn't finished with you. Because in this city, your story is never just yours. It becomes an anecdote. A lesson. A warning. You're not a criminal. You're a case study. An example paraded not on marble plaques, but in whispers, side eyes, and the occasional sermon about civic virtue. It begins innocently enough. A teacher at the Ludus, the local school, retells your crime to a group of fidgeting boys, all chewing their styluses and pretending to pay attention. Let this be a lesson, he says, dramatically gesturing toward the window, as if you might be visible from there, still wearing your thorn crown, still muttering about grain weights. The boys laugh. The teacher smirks. You are now part of the curriculum. You expected to disappear. Instead, you've become compulsory education. At the baths, you try to blend in. The steam is thick. The voice is louder than the water. But even here, even as you carefully scrub shame off your elbows, someone leans over and says, "Weren't you the one who?" And you don't even need to hear the rest. Yes, it was you. It is always you. You are the punchline to a joke that stopped being funny before it started. Even the priests get involved. During a quiet haruspex reading some ritual goat or bird inspection, the augur mutters something about dishonest citizens angering the gods. He doesn't name you, but his eyes do. You don't just offend the Republic now, you offend Jupiter. Congratulations. You imagine a quiet comeback, a reformed life. But Rome has other plans. They start giving tours. Not official ones, of course. Just a friendly neighbour explaining, "That's where the merchant was caught lying. They say he cried." Or "That's the post where the thief recited his confession for 2 days." His voice cracked. You've become part of the urban scenery. A cautionary footnote. You thought you could fade into the background. But backgrounds in Rome are made of stories, and yours is the one people like to tell before dinner. Then comes the worst part. Someone thanks you. Earnestly. Sincerely. "Your example helped my son understand the consequences of civic dishonesty," says a local baker, handing you a half-stale loaf with just enough passive aggression to count as frosting. You nod. You say thank you. You want to scream. But you don't, because that would be undignified. And dignity is the only thing you're still pretending to have. Eventually the story fades. Slowly. Someone else makes a mistake, gets caught, becomes the new exhibit. You're free. Almost. Because long after the crowds forget your name, the punishment still whispers in the background of your life, a reminder that in Rome, the sentence is never just about the act. It's about the retelling, the recycling, the quiet conversion of shame into social order. You were judged once, but you'll be referenced forever. You'd think you could talk your way out of it. That if you just explained, clearly and calmly, that the donkey wasn't yours, the scales were broken, and no, you didn't know the magistrate's nephew was standing behind you when you made that joke people might listen. But this is Rome, where speaking during judgment is like tossing olive oil onto a fire. It doesn't extinguish anything. It just makes everything more theatrical and harder to clean up afterward. You're brought into the basilica, not the sacred one, the civic one, where deals are made, debts confessed, and citizens publicly unravelled for the amusement of anyone with time to loiter. The marble floor echoes under your sandals. Every step sounds louder than it should, like your own feet are accusing you. You expected a private hearing. Instead, you get a minor audience and an assistant scribe who already looks bored. The magistrate sits behind a desk carved with little lions. Real lions probably had more empathy. You begin to speak, but he holds up a finger not to stop you, but to scribble something, probably unflattering. You clear your throat. He sighs. You start again. He raises an eyebrow that says, "This had better be worth my afternoon wine being delayed." It isn't. You thought your voice would matter. It doesn't. Roman justice isn't a dialogue. It's a performance. And you are not the star. You are the intermission. You try again. This time you gesture. Not wildly, just hopefully. The guard behind you shifts his weight. A subtle reminder that hope is cute, but regulations are cuter. The magistrate finally speaks. Slowly, quietly. As though explaining to a child why clay isn't money. You may speak, he says, but we've already heard enough. You glance around. Who is we? There's only one of him. Then you remember in Rome, the state is many-headed, many-voiced, and none of them are on your side. You manage a sentence. Maybe two. Something about grain storage, or civic confusion, or just how small and silly the whole matter is. He nods. Not because he agrees, because the nod is the sound of a gate closing. You thought speaking would help. It made things worse. Now it looks like you're trying too hard, desperate, possibly rehearsed. And Romans hate nothing more than someone who rehearses poorly. So you stop. You press your lips together like a dying senator sealing a pact with the gods. It's better this way. Silence may not help you, but at least it won't hurt as loudly. The judgment is passed, a fine, a public reprimand, or something more creative. You hear it, barely. You nod, pretending you understand, pretending you accept. You leave the hall slower than you entered. Your tongue feels heavier than your feet. You've learned something, though. Not about justice, but about volume. That in Rome, silence doesn't mean innocence. But speaking might just mean a longer sentence. You hoped the worst was over. You truly did. The fine's been tallied, the magistrate's had his fill of sarcasm, and your neighbour finally stopped telling everyone about the time you tried to bribe a poultry inspector. But there's still one more surprise. Because in Rome, consequences have schedules, and those schedules are public. You wake up one morning and discover your name spelled slightly wrong, of course posted on the forum's notice board, nestled between a property auction and a list of festival dates. It's there in black ink on stiff parchment. Lucius Fulvus minor fraudulent measurement of lentils market punishment set for calends. You read it twice. Then again, it doesn't get better. You thought shame was something private. Turns out it's been calendarized. The calends, the first day of the Roman month, is supposed to be a time for temple visits, debt reminders, and moderately hopeful sacrifices. Instead, you've been scheduled like a gladiator with no armor. Friends avoid your gaze. Shopkeepers give small, pitying nods. One man offers you a discount on sandals not out of kindness, but because he wants you to be wearing nice ones when the guards escort you. It gets worse. You're not the only one listed. The whole month is planned like an event series. Market thief on the 3rd, goat impersonator on the 7th, someone accused of slander by gesture on the 10th. Your shame has become part of a civic routine. Something people mark on their wax tablets next to pick up olives and buy wine for mother-in-law. You hoped the punishment would be discreet. Instead, it's a scheduled attraction. There's even a bench people sit on to watch. You arrive early, because not arriving would make it worse. The guards are already waiting, tapping their staffs against the stone like they're trying to summon rhythm from bureaucracy. You're led to the center of the square, where a short wooden platform stands not high enough to matter, just tall enough for you to feel like furniture. The punishment itself isn't violent, it's symbolic. You're made to recite your offense, again, under the eye of a junior priest who records it for moral archives. Then comes the placard, worn around your neck, scratched with your crime. It hangs heavy, not because of weight, but because of how many eyes it attracts. Children point. Tourists, yes. Even in ancient Rome whisper. Someone sketches you badly. You feel like part of a living museum, except the exhibit sweats, stumbles, and occasionally curses under breath. You thought punishment was immediate. Instead, it's delayed, coordinated, rehearsed a civic drama planned by people who take pleasure in putting your embarrassment between 2 feast days in a goat market. By the time you're dismissed, the sun is high, your voice is hoarse, and the placard has left an itchy dent in your collarbone. You walk home through streets that feel narrower than before. Not because they are, but because every doorway contains someone pretending not to look. You've been out of trouble for a week now. Or so you think. You're avoiding the forum, minding your lentils, staying politely silent in bathhouse debates about tax policy. You've learned your lesson, or at least, you've learned how loudly Rome teaches it. Then a new rumour makes its way across the neighbourhood. There's going to be a trial, a public one. People gather, speculate. Who's on trial? Who offended the gods, the city, or both? You listen. You squint. You ask again. Surely you misheard. A chicken. They're putting a chicken on trial. You blink. You wait for someone to laugh. No one does. Because in Rome, even animals aren't safe from the reach of justice. And if a chicken can be punished, imagine what that means for you, a human being with opinions and unpaid debts. The bird had allegedly clucked at the wrong time during an augur's reading. An omen reading, no less. The priest claims the chicken's behaviour disrupted divine interpretation. The result? A bad harvest, or a military loss, or a senator tripping on a step and breaking his dignity. The specifics are vague. The consequence, however, is real. The chicken will be executed, publicly, for insolence. You laugh quietly, nervously, because this isn't rare. Animals in Rome can be held accountable for crimes. Pigs have been charged with toppling statues, goats with blasphemy, dogs with interfering in sacred processions. No one is above the law, not even livestock. You think the absurdity protects you, that if the courts are busy lecturing birds, maybe they'll forget your unpaid tax fine. But no. If anything, it's a reminder. Rome doesn't need logic. Rome has precedent. And the precedent says anything or anyone can be guilty if it makes the crowd nod. You attend the trial. Not because you want to, but because you're afraid not to. The bird sits, or rather, is tied on a small platform. A scribe reads the charges. Someone translates them. Yes, really. The chicken is assigned an advocate, a thin man with too much hair and too little patience. He makes a defense. It involves the weather, possibly fate, definitely a mention of divine fatigue. The priest counters. He waves a scroll. The crowd murmurs. Judgment is passed. The chicken is declared guilty of spiritual sabotage. You thought trials were for people. Now you're not even convinced they're for sense. The punishment is swift. The crowd cheers. The priest looks vindicated. The scribe records the verdict in a logbook thick enough to flatten a cow. You walk away, unsure whether to be horrified or impressed. Rome takes itself seriously, even when it's holding poultry accountable for military misfortunes. Later that night, someone jokes about your own trial. At least you weren't compared to a chicken, they say. You smile weakly, because in this city you might be next. And if Rome is willing to execute a rooster for interrupting an omen, it won't hesitate to fine you for sneezing during a prayer. You wake up one morning with a feeling, not dread exactly, but the kind of anxious nausea that only arrives when you've heard your name whispered by a senator's slave while passing the olive stall. You haven't done anything. Not recently. Nothing serious. Nothing worth official attention. And yet there is a summons, not a formal one. A verbal invitation from someone who says they'd like a word with you. You try to ask who they are. The messenger only smiles. You thought justice followed laws. Turns out sometimes it follows moods. You arrive at a lesser court, not the Senate, not the consul, but something murkier. A committee, a concilium, a handful of men in clean togas with slightly bored expressions and far too much free time. They inform you that your behaviour has been unsettling, not illegal, just unsettling. You've disrupted civic harmony. You've spread unregulated opinions. You once laughed during a reading of Virgil and didn't apologize. You ask, what is the charge? They shrug. You ask, what law have I broken? They smile. Then one clears his throat and says, we'll have to create a precedent. That's when you realize the punishment hasn't been selected from a list. It's being invented on the spot. You expected a citation, a warning, maybe a symbolic slap on the wrist. Instead, they assign you a role. Not a punishment, a role. You are now, temporarily, the official moral reminder. For the next 10 market days, you must walk the forum dressed in neutral beige, a toga dyed with diluted ash, and stand near the public fountain reciting civic proverbs. All day. Every day. You're not jailed. You're not whipped. You're made into a message. You thought punishment involved pain. Instead, it involves public theatre and terrible costume design. The worst part isn't the togas, though they itch like guilt and fit like regret. It's the script. The same 5 phrases, repeated endlessly. Civic unity begins with silent obedience. Trade fairly, lest the gods trade you. Honour is the coin of Rome. Speak with care, walls may have ears. Even the fig tree grows straighter when watched. You say them, again and again, while the crowd passes by. Some ignore you, some smirk, some throw grape skins. A few nod solemnly, the kind of nod that means glad it's you and not me. You hope to be forgotten. Instead, you've been made unforgettable in the worst possible way. By day 5, your voice is cracking. By day 7, you begin to recite in your sleep. By day 10, people start copying your phrases just to mock them. Children sing them in rhymes. The baker names a flatbread after you. And when it finally ends, when the ash toga is removed and the roll revoked, your name has become shorthand for pointless piety. You're free. But the echo remains. Because in Rome, if no punishment fits the crime, one will be tailored. And like most Roman garments, it won't fit comfortably. It will itch relentlessly, and everyone will pretend it's dignified. You've served your time, worn the toga, paid the fine, survived the forum gossip, the public chanting, and that one senatorial niece who kept sketching you with increasingly unflattering noses. You walk home lighter, thinking maybe it's finally behind you. The punishment is over, the record cleared. You've been forgiven. But in Rome, forgiveness is more ceremonial than sincere, more administrative than emotional. It's not a clean slate. It's a memo that says we've filed this away for now. You thought the ordeal would conclude with closure, a symbolic washing of hands, maybe even a nod from a city official. Instead, it concludes with you being quietly promoted to someone people avoid at dinner parties. You try to return to your old routines. Same bakery, same bench near the fountain, same route to the grain stalls. But people shift when you arrive. Conversations pause a beat too long. Smiles are delayed by suspicion. No one says anything unkind. They don't have to. The air does it for them, thick with the kind of social humidity that leaves your tunic damp and your dignity sagging. You thought exile was a journey across the empire. Sometimes it's just moving 3 seats down the communal bench and realizing no one followed. You visit a friend. A close one. Or so you thought. She answers the door, eyes flicking behind you as if expecting a censor. "Oh," she says, as if your presence has caught her off guard and slightly off-brand. You're not denied entry. You're offered wine, watered down. You sit. You talk. But her laughter comes late, and her stories arrive edited. She's careful now, measured. You've become the test subject for social risk. And there's paperwork. Of course there's paperwork. You visit the records office to ask gently, hopefully whether your name can be cleared from the board. The clerk frowns, thumb deep in a pot of ink, and says, "It's marked as resolved." You press. "Can it be removed?" "Resolved," he repeats, without looking up, which, in Roman terms, means permanently visible, but less dramatic. You hoped for forgiveness. What you got was bureaucratic forgetfulness. Then, 2 weeks later, you're asked to serve as a witness in a minor case. A neighbour's grain weight dispute. You agree. It feels like a step back into normalcy. You arrive early, practice your statement. But before you speak, the magistrate asks with what can only be described as recreational cruelty, "Weren't you involved in that fig measuring scandal?" He chuckles. The room chuckles. Your neighbour looks apologetic. The case continues without you. You were forgiven. Yes, just not reset. And so you adjust. You stop speaking in crowds. You step aside when someone important approaches. You begin buying bread from a different vendor, one who doesn't blink quite so much when slicing. Life resumes not as it was, but as it now must be, because in Rome, justice isn't about endings. It's about remembering. And forgiveness isn't freedom. It's a soft-spoken reminder that you were once inconvenient and you might be again. You remind yourself of this the way one might rehearse a hymn or a family recipe, not because you doubt it, but because no one else seems to believe you. Your name is Gavious. Your accent is wrong. Your sandals are dusty. You've arrived in Messana, across the straits from the glittering shell of Sicily, and from the moment your foot hits the shore, it feels like the ground itself is skeptical. You expected welcome. After all, you're Roman. Citizenship, stamped in legal breath, guaranteed you certain things: the right to trial, the right to appeal, the right not to be stuffed in a cell like leftover fish. Instead, you get stares. Your scroll is ignored. Your explanation is met with the kind of smile usually reserved for animals that don't quite speak. You try again. I am a Roman citizen, you say, louder this time, as if volume could reinforce your bloodline. It doesn't. Someone laughs. Someone else spits. And then a soldier grabs your wrist, firm as an accusation, and says something that doesn't need translating. The chains are cold, not metaphorically. Literally cold iron that smells of rust and wet leather, like it's been waiting for wrists that talk too much. You thought a citizen's cry meant something. But here, in the domain of Verres, governor and connoisseur of quiet cruelty, your citizenship is treated like a rumour with bad timing. They take you through alleys that grow narrow by the step. The buildings lean inward like they're trying to hear your last excuses. Somewhere behind you, someone mutters about making examples. You hope they mean someone else. They don't. The cell is not a cell, it's a hole, carved from something older than fairness. The ceiling is low, the walls damp, and the straw on the floor has clearly retired from any former profession. You sit. You say nothing. You think about Rome, not the real one, but the version in your head. With colonnades, civility, laws that whisper promises. You assumed the system worked because it looked impressive. Marble always lies. No one asks for your version. No one checks your documents. You shout, once, the phrase every Roman is told will save them in emergencies, civis Romanus sum. I am a Roman citizen. The guard shrugs. A dog barks. The wind doesn't even bother carrying your words away. You say it again. And again. Louder. Desperate. It echoes, and the echo mocks you. You imagined citizenship was a shield. But in the wrong province, under the wrong governor, it's just a liability. A mark that makes your suffering more interesting, not less. You try to sleep. You can't. The floor smells like vinegar and regret. The walls sweat in the dark. And outside, in the world still pretending to be Roman, the sun will rise tomorrow, just not for you. You're not alone in the cell, though it feels that way. The others don't speak. Not to you, not to each other. They sit like statues left out in the rain, damp and unfinished, slowly worn down by silence. One coughs occasionally a dry, rhythmic sound like someone breaking kindling in the dark. Another hums tunelessly, over and over, a melody that could be a prayer, or a lullaby, or simply the sound a brain makes when it wants to forget where it is. You try to speak to them. You begin with your name, your origin, your claim, the great magic phrase again, civis Romanus sum. One man looks at you like you've just offered him a poem written on cabbage leaves. Another simply closes his eyes. Here, citizenship is not a song. It's a noise. You imagined the words would unlock something. Instead, they bounce off walls that no longer believe in grammar. Time doesn't pass here. It sags. The day is a long hallway with no doors. You sleep in short, shivering shifts. You eat something grey, possibly porridge, possibly punishment. The guards don't speak either. They grunt, gesture, and drop things. Food, water, accusations. All with the grace of people performing a task too boring to do well and too cruel to stop doing altogether. At some point, someone not a guard comes to visit. A clerk, maybe. A man with a wax tablet and a stylus chewed down to the nub. He asks your name. You give it. He asks again. You give it louder. He asks where you're from, who sent you, what your business was. You answer. You clarify. You mention the citizenship. He doesn't write it down. Not once. You thought this was the interview before justice. It's just inventory. He nods. thanks you as if you've helped him remember something mildly inconvenient, and leaves without a backward glance. Behind him, the door thuds closed with all the ceremony of a dropped book. Later that day, they let you out not into freedom, but into a courtyard, brief sunlight, warm stones, the smell of olives faint and mocking. You think perhaps this is a turning point. Perhaps your voice was finally heard, carried upward, passed along. Then a rope is thrown around your wrists. Not tight, just enough to remind you that the moment is not yours. You're not being released. You're being prepared. You speak again. I am a Roman citizen. It sounds smaller in open air, less confident, more like a question. Someone laughs. Yes, they say. So was everyone who mattered. And that's when you understand, to matter here is a political condition, not a legal one. Citizenship is paperwork. Value is social. You are not forgotten. You are deliberately ignored. You thought the worst had passed inside the cell. But the cell was a waiting room. What happens next, you realize, is not a violation of Roman law, it is Roman law, wielded by people who know exactly how much they can get away with when no one is watching, and no one wants to. You remember your lessons. Taught to you by an aging tutor who always smelled of ink and boiled cabbage, who assured you with cracked knuckles and confidence that Roman citizenship was sacred, that it meant something, that no matter where you stood in the empire, your rights followed you like a loyal dog, always ready to bark if injustice came sniffing. And now, here you are, shackled, moved like cargo, processed without comment. Your voice has worn thin, your wrists are sore, and that loyal dog, it never showed up. You thought law was a sword. Turns out, it's a ladder, and you're standing at the bottom, while someone else decides whether you're worth climbing down for. They parade you through Messana in the early light, when most people are still yawning and brushing crumbs from their tunics. You're barefoot. The stones are rough, not painful exactly, but insulting, like being offered bad wine by someone who knows you won't refuse it. A few townsfolk glance up from their stalls. No one gasps. No one asks questions. They've seen this before. You're not the first Roman to be handled like a misbehaving goat, and you won't be the last. You call out again, one final time, voice cracked from sleep and doubt, civis Romanus sum. Someone nearby smirks. The phrase, once heavy with dignity, now lands like a bad joke at a wake. They lead you to the harbour, where a post stands wooden, weathered, and stained with the history of bad days. There's no trial, no priest, no ceremony, just procedure. One of the guards reads something off a tablet, mostly for form. The other tightens the rope around your arms with the precision of someone who does this more often than they clip their toenails. You assumed somewhere someone would intervene. Perhaps a clerk, perhaps a soldier with a soft heart and a strong memory. But no one comes. There is no cavalry. No concerned magistrate running in with scrolls raised high, shouting about protocols. Only the sea breeze, disinterested, brushing past you like it's late for something. You feel the first blow. Not a sword, not a whip, a rod. The virga, symbol of Roman discipline. It's supposed to be reserved. For soldiers. For slaves. For people who aren't you. But apparently today it is. You think this can't be happening. But it is. And not only is it happening, it's happening legally. Because here's the part your tutor never emphasized. The law protects those who are seen. Those who are named. Those who have someone willing to raise a hand and say, no. But you today are invisible. Your name didn't make it to the right scroll. Your story didn't matter to the man who stamps things. And so the law folds in on itself, becomes something decorative. Ornamental. Like a statue missing its head, technically still art, but no longer useful. You don't scream, not out loud, but inside something frays. You came here believing the law was your birthright. Instead, it is your costume, one everyone else has stopped pretending to see. You've never met him. You don't even know what he looks like. But his name is everywhere, carved into the lintels of government buildings, etched into temple dedications, whispered at wine stands like a punchline everyone's too scared to laugh at. Verus, the governor of Sicily. A man whose appetite for luxury is rivaled only by his hunger for control. He's the reason you're here. Not officially, of course. Officially, no one is to blame. But unofficially, everyone knows Verres doesn't just govern. He curates pain. You had assumed, in that naive way Roman citizens are taught to assume, that governors were statesmen. Stoic, dutiful, slightly bored with power. But Verres is something else. A collector. He doesn't merely rule. He accumulates art, silver, scandal, and occasionally citizens who have the misfortune of reminding him that the Republic has rules. He has never spoken your name, and he never will. That would imply a level of responsibility he doesn't believe in. You are not a person to him. You're a moment. A satisfying flex of jurisdiction. A mild legal experiment with a bruised face. People describe him in strange terms. He walks like he owns gravity. He orders wine with the same tone he uses for death warrants. His favourite sound is a plea turning into a whimper. You don't know if any of that is true, but it feels true. And in Messana, truth is shaped by how close you stand to his guards. You once believed that governors were temporary servants of the Republic, answerable to Rome. But Verres behaves as though Rome is answerable to him. He reassigns property with a shrug. He arrests without warrants. He replaces judges with friends. And when someone cries Civis Romanus sum, he makes a note not to stop, but to smile. You hear from another prisoner, a merchant, who's been here long enough to memorize the rats that Verres once tried to tax the air in public courtyards. Not seriously. Not as a law. Just to see if anyone would notice. They didn't. Or maybe they did, but they stayed quiet. You thought power made men cautious. It makes them creative. Some say Verres was once decent, that he served in wars, that he quoted Cicero and believed in civic virtue. But something shifted. Somewhere between his third villa and fourth mistress, the Republic became less a system to protect and more a stage on which to perform wealth. And if that performance required an occasional citizen getting flogged in the harbour, well, so be it. He doesn't punish out of necessity. He punishes like a man rearranging furniture casually, experimentally, until it pleases him. And every person like you, dragged across courtyards and stripped of voice, is just another item in his personal collection, a story to tell, a warning to leave on display. You don't hate him. Not exactly. That would require belief in the possibility of him caring. What you feel is quieter. Like the sound of dust settling in a locked room. It's not rage. It's resignation. You thought justice had enemies. You've learned it also has curators. You remember vaguely that citizens can appeal. It was drilled into you alongside other civic virtues like washing after the latrine, voting when sober, and not publicly insulting statues. Appeal to Rome. If a governor oversteps, a citizen may cry foul, and the law will answer. In theory. Always in theory. So you ask. Politely at first, then firmly. You state your name. You state your status. You invoke your right not emotionally, but with the exact wording from that dull civil text your father insisted you memorize. You even pronounce it correctly. Latin with crisp vowels, no provincial slurring. The guard predictably blinks, then chuckles, then spits into the dust between his feet. You thought the words would unlock a door. They don't even unlock eye contact. Later, a local scribe arrives, not to help, but to record. That's what they do here, they record things. Not for justice, but for bookkeeping. You're asked to state your appeal again. You do. The scribe scratches notes lazily, quill scratching like a mouse gnawing through papyrus. Then he says, flatly, it will be forwarded to the governor. You blink. I thought appeals went to Rome. He pauses, then shrugs. Eventually. A word that in Roman administration means either never or long after you've stopped caring. You ask how long. The scribe doesn't know. You ask what happens next. He adjusts his sandals and mutters something about being processed. Then he leaves. That's it. Your appeal, the very thing that was supposed to safeguard your dignity, now floats somewhere between a scroll, a table, and a man who doesn't believe in urgency. You imagined a courier galloping to the Senate. You get a man who smells like wet limestone and forgets your name before finishing your sentence. They let you sit in a slightly cleaner cell after that. A gesture, perhaps. Or maybe just because the rats were getting territorial in the old one. Days pass. Or what you assume are days. You mark time by meals and by how often the light shifts under the doorway. No one tells you anything. You're in bureaucratic purgatory, not condemned, but not free, and very definitely not believed. One morning, a different guard tosses a folded scrap of wax tablet at your feet. You unfold it. It contains a single line. Your appeal is under review. That's all. No name. No seal. No time frame. You stare at it like it's a sacred text, trying to find reassurance in the scratchy letters. But there's nothing there except the mocking echo of a promise made by people too far away to care. You thought appeal meant attention. It doesn't. It means delay. It means putting your name on a very long list behind other people who also once believed the law was fast, fair, or interested. And in that moment, you realize something colder than the chains around your wrists. You are still Roman, just not in a way that matters to Rome anymore. They move you again. No explanation. No change of clothes. Just a nod from a guard and the unmistakable shuffle of administrative boredom. You're taken through the streets. Not dragged, that would imply urgency. You're walked. Slowly. Like a man being shown off before being taken away. People look up from their fish stalls, pause in mid-conversation, raise eyebrows without moving their mouths. You are something between a warning and a decoration. You thought maybe this was a step toward your appeal, maybe a transfer, a hearing, some kind of civic procedure. But you've learned now that in Messana, if they don't tell you what's happening, it's probably because it's already happened, and you've simply yet to perform your part. You arrive in the forum, not the large one, with pillars and temple steps, but the smaller, provincial cousin cracked flagstones, fading paint on the walls, a statue of Jupiter that looks like it's developed a personal grudge against everyone who's ever spoken nearby. There's a platform, just a few inches high, enough to elevate you, not enough to spare your dignity. The kind of stage used for tax announcements, cheap poetry contests, or unfortunate civic theatre. Today, it's you. Again, you expected punishment in the shadows. This time they want light. You're made to stand still. No shackles. No shouting. Just presence. Just you. And a wooden tablet around your neck, your name, your crime, written in letters deep enough to read from across the market. A boy throws an olive pit. It bounces off your foot. He doesn't even giggle. It's not entertainment. It's routine. People walk by. Some stop. Most don't. Your background noise now the thing between the baker and the well. Occasionally someone mutters, "Still here?" Or what was it again? And their friend shrugs, like remembering would be too generous. The worst moment comes not when someone insults you, but when an old friend passes. A man you knew in school. You shared a tutor. He once borrowed your sandals. He sees you. He pauses. He frowns, not in pity, but calculation. Then he adjusts his cloak and keeps walking. You try not to follow him with your eyes. You fail. You assumed that the forum was for civic exchange. It's also where civic silence thrives best, not the kind of silence that respects, but the kind that buries. Later, when the sun begins to sting your scalp and your legs beg for mercy, a minor clerk steps forward and clears his throat. Not for you, but for the crowd. He reads your name. Then the word under investigation. Then a reminder that the Republic does not tolerate fraud. He speaks with the tone of someone describing wet plaster. Someone in the crowd nods. No one cheers. You are not convicted. You are not acquitted. You are suspended legally, socially, gravitationally in a position where no one is quite sure whether to hate you or simply forget you. And so you stand there, while life continues in circles around your feet, while justice, ever the playwright, decides if your story will get an ending, or simply fade in the background as someone else's act begins. They finally assign you legal representation. You'd given up hoping for it. It arrives like a knock at the wrong door, unexpected, late, and already apologizing with its posture. The advocate's name is Marcellus. He's young, far too young. His toga is wrinkled, his scrolls are damp, and his breath smells faintly of old figs and last night's disappointment. He greets you with a grin that tries very hard to be professional and fails entirely. You imagine someone stern, scholarly, someone with rhetorical daggers honed on Cicero's finest speeches. Instead, you get Marcellus, who asks if you have any wine, and then sits down without waiting for permission. "Let's begin," he says, unrolling a scroll with the enthusiasm of a man unwrapping spoiled cheese. He squints. He mutters. He makes several notes with a stylus that's clearly been chewed into abstract sculpture. You lean in, trying to help. He waves you off, then immediately forgets your name. You thought legal defense was about precision. This feels more like a late monologue you at a badly attended dinner party. He asks what you're accused of. You tell him. He frowns as if you've just told him the sea has been cancelled. "That's not even a real charge," he mutters. "It's interpretive." You ask if that helps. He shrugs. "Only if the magistrate's bored." You try to remain hopeful. He's your advocate, after all. A fellow citizen. A trained professional. He surely has methods. He surely has arguments. He surely has, at the very least, sobriety. But Marcellus is the kind of man who builds cases with the same reliability as someone building a ladder from wet bread. The hearing is scheduled. It's not public, but not private either. Held in a small hall where everything smells of dust and previous mistakes. A few officials sit at a raised table, fiddling with wax tablets and looking mildly irritated, as if they were promised figs and got olives instead. Marcellus opens with a joke. A joke. About governors. It doesn't land. One of the officials coughs deliberately. Another taps his stylus. You close your eyes. He proceeds. He mispronounces your name. Twice. He references the wrong article of law. He calls Verres verrucus, which means wart, and then tries to pass it off as wit. You imagine the floor cracking open and swallowing you out of mercy. It doesn't. You expected defense. What you get is a performance, and not even a good one. By the end, the magistrate looks more confused than convinced. Your case is marked pending, which is Latin for "we'll forget about this until someone more interesting does something worse." Outside, Marcellus claps your shoulder and says, "Not bad, eh?" You don't answer. You just stare at the street, wondering if wine is stronger when drunk with despair. You walk away not because you're free, but because no one has told you to stop. Your advocate disappears before the ink dries on your name. No final word. No strategy meeting. Just one last burp behind the basilica wall. And you think in Rome, justice may be blind, but apparently it also drinks before noon. There's talk of a letter. Quiet talk. The kind that carries between guards who've grown bored of hitting things and clerks who like to sound important while adjusting scrolls. Someone mentions that a certain senator, someone with a cousin, who knows a lawyer, who once owed your family a favour, might have written to Rome. A real appeal. A real letter. Sealed, stamped, and sent through the official channels. You try not to hope. Hope is expensive here, and no one gives refunds. Still, the idea takes root. Maybe someone's spoken for you. Maybe your name, written in actual ink on actual parchment, now sits on a desk in the city where laws are born and occasionally remembered. You imagine a senator reading your case by candlelight, sighing gravely, and then nodding with resolve. You imagine an official dictating your name with clarity and care, preparing to undo the tangle that is your current situation. You imagine too much. The next day you ask a guard if the letter exists. He scratches his beard like it's a philosophical question. Could be, he says. Things get sent all the time. You ask when a reply might arrive. He laughs. Not cruelly, just with the exhausted amusement of someone who knows better. Could be days. Could be never. Then he walks away. You're left with a new category of torment, plausible salvation. Not quite a lie. Not quite a promise. Just a maybe. A very Roman maybe, elegantly vague, endlessly delayed, and structurally sound enough to prevent anyone from being blamed. You ask again the next day, and again the day after. You try not to sound desperate. You fail. One clerk finally sighs and tells you, there is something in the incoming tray. You ask to see it. He shakes his head. It's not addressed to you directly. You ask who it's from. He shrugs. Someone from Rome. That's all I'm allowed to say. You thank him anyway, because you're tired and thank yous cost nothing. At night, you lie awake thinking about the letter. Not what's in it, but whether it's real. Whether it says your name or someone else's. Whether it will arrive at the right desk, read by the right eyes, before the wrong hands schedule you for another round of foreign theatre. You expected freedom to come with trumpets. Now you pray for it to arrive in the quiet scratch of stylus on wax. Days blur. No new messages. The letter, if it exists, continues to exist in rumour. It becomes a thing you mention less and think about more. It becomes your invisible companion always beside you, always unconfirmed. And if anyone notices you looking more hopeful, they don't comment. In Rome, people learn early not to disturb the fragile scaffolding of someone else's survival fantasy. Eventually, a new scribe appears. She carries a scroll. She doesn't look at you. She doesn't speak. She places the scroll on a table, stamps it, and walks out. You stare at it. You can't read it from here. You're not allowed to touch it. You're told simply wait. And that's what you do. They call for a name. Not yours, but close. Very close. Just different enough to make the universe feel like it's playing a joke in bad taste. The man who stands when it's red looks nothing like you. Older, softer, a merchant with hands that haven't touched anything heavier than a stylus in years. He looks surprised too, as if he also thought it might have been you. He glances your way, a flash of awkward recognition, then follows the clerk out of the room with the gait of someone afraid to ask questions in case the answer is worse than the silence. You remain seated, not out of choice but because your legs won't move. The hope you'd stitched together from rumour and repetition unravels all at once, one thread, then another, until what's left is just you, again, and a floor that doesn't care. You thought your name was secure, carved in marble somewhere, protected by laws. But today, your name feels more like a borrowed tunic, wrinkled, easily mistaken, and one gust away from being stripped off you. The scribe says nothing. She records the moment, flicks a bit of wax from her tablet, and moves on. A new scroll is opened. A new name is read. Not yours, not this time either. You wonder if the letter was ever written at all, if it was delivered, if it was read, if it was misfiled under someone whose name sounds like yours, or looks like yours, or simply arrived on a day when the clerk had wine with lunch and sorted everything by whim instead of alphabet. You expected bureaucracy to fail slowly. Instead, it fails instantly and without explanation. Another day passes. Then another. Your clothes begin to stink in the very specific way that only forgotten citizens manage to achieve, sweat baked into wool, regret soaked into thread. No one offers you replacements. No one notices. You have become furniture in the waiting room of imperial memory. Then, one morning, a younger guard, one you don't recognize, appears and says your name. Correctly. Clearly. He doesn't whisper it. He doesn't shout it either. He just says it, like it's not a complicated thing. You stand too fast. Your knees protest. Your heart doesn't. It runs laps in your chest like it has somewhere to be. You follow him, unsure whether you're headed toward a verdict, a signature, or simply another room with worse acoustics. He doesn't say. He just leads. Past the cells, past the court, into a smaller building built of older stones that still remember what fairness used to feel like. Inside, another clerk waits. She's holding a sealed letter. She breaks it open without ceremony and reads. And as she speaks, slowly, with the practiced monotone of someone who's recited 100 such letters, you listen for your name. This time it's in there. This time it's yours. You don't know yet what the letter means, whether it grants freedom, declares delay, or simply restates your misery in prettier phrasing. But for the first time in weeks, your identity has been confirmed by something more official than rumour. And, in Rome, sometimes that's all you get. The clerk finishes reading the letter. You hear every word, but only some of them land. The rest float past like steam in a bathhouse present, warming, and mostly meaningless, unless you're already dressed for something better. The letter states that your appeal has been noted, that your treatment may have involved irregular procedure, that your status requires review under the auspices of qualified authority. In simpler terms, no decision has been made, but the appearance of concern has been achieved. You expected justice. What you get is paperwork dressed as mercy. Still, it means something. You are no longer a ghost in the system. You are, instead, a line item with a shadow of legitimacy. The clerk looks up from the scroll, blinks once, and says, "You're being released." You pause. You don't believe her at first. Not because she's lying, because the word has lost its shape. Released. From what? From being forgotten. From walking in circles made of stone and silence. From sleeping on straw that resents your body. She stands, hands you a small tablet with your name. Temporary status pending further review, it reads. Not cleared, not innocent, just no longer confined. You hold it like it might dissolve. Or bite. A guard walks you out, not the same one who brought you in. This one's silent. Younger. Either too new to judge or too tired to care. You pass through gates that don't squeak, which feels like a lie. The sun is out, the sky is absurdly blue, and the birds are, frankly, overdoing it. You step onto the street and hesitate, like you've forgotten how to stand still without being inspected. You expected applause. Or at least a nod. Instead, the city doesn't notice you. The fishmongers shout their prices. The bakers burn their loaves. Children chase each other past the very spot where you were once displayed like a bad moral example. It's all the same. You are the only thing that's changed, and even that is debatable. You find a bench. Sit. Breathe. The bench is warm. You realize you haven't sat on something dry in weeks. It feels suspiciously luxurious, like sitting in someone else's memory of comfort. A dog passes by and sniffs your feet. It doesn't bark. That feels significant. You're not sure what to do next. You have no orders, no timeline, no instructions beyond don't cause trouble. You are legally vague, a Roman citizen who wasn't not guilty, but also wasn't punished correctly. A clerical shrug. You thought freedom would feel like a gate opening. It feels more like being told to leave before someone changes their mind. You stand. The tablet still in your hand. Your name, your real name written in faded ink. People walk past you without recognition. You are not a spectacle anymore. You are not a warning. You are not, for now, important. And somehow that's a kind of peace. You've heard rumours about the sack. Everyone has. Whispered in bathhouses, mumbled over dice games, hinted at in the nervous laughter of drunk farmers. It sounds too absurd to be real. A punishment involving a sack, a collection of animals, and a condemned man all tied up together like some cursed picnic basket. But it was real. It was Roman. And it was called poena calae, the penalty of the sack. You assumed when Rome punished murderers, it used the sword. Clean, efficient, theatrical if needed. But this was ritualized chaos, a recipe with ingredients chosen for symbolism and suffering rather than speed. Here's how it went. A man convicted of parricide, the murder of a parent, would first be scourged. Not lightly. Not excessively. Just enough to soften his sense of dignity. Then, when bruises bloomed across his back like the empire across a map, he was sewn into a large leather sack. He wasn't alone in there. The Romans, ever fond of metaphors made literal, included several companions. Traditionally a dog, a monkey, a snake, and a rooster. Why these creatures? Interpretations vary. The dog for betrayal, the monkey for misrule, the snake for deception, the rooster for unnatural waking, or maybe just because it made the sack louder. You thought cruelty came from rage. But this came from design. Imagine it. You, cramped in dark leather, your legs tangled with fur, feathers, and scales. The monkey screeches. The snake hisses. The dog panics, claws at anything soft. The rooster flaps, convinced dawn is arriving, one scream at a time. There's no escape, no air, no silence. The sack becomes a small, howling universe of judgment. And then they throw it in the river. You expected execution to be quick. This is prolonged panic sealed in knots. The Tiber receives the sack like it's just another offering. No funeral, no elegy. Just a slow, writhing bubble trail as man and beast vanish beneath the surface. Witnesses don't speak. What is there to say? Rome has declared its verdict not just against the body, but against the very memory of the crime. The man is erased, and the sack, if recovered, is emptied without curiosity. You ask yourself, what does this achieve? Why go through such absurd lengths? But that's the wrong question. Rome didn't invent poenocaliae to be effective. It invented it to be unforgettable. A spectacle made private. A punishment heard about more than seen. You thought the most terrifying part would be the drowning. It's not. It's the symbolism being sewn into your guilt, surrounded by metaphors that scratch and bite. As the Republic says, you've torn the order of the world, and now the world will twist around you in return. No tomb. No marker. Just the river, carrying a sack that once held everything except forgiveness. You wouldn't think there'd be protocol for stuffing animals into a death sack. And yet, leave it to Rome to have a preferred order. First the dog, frightened but familiar. Then the snake coiled in a jar, dropped in like guilt, disguised as a rope. Next the rooster, agitated, confused, already crowing for a sunrise it won't see. And finally the monkey. Always the monkey. Always last. No one quite says why. Maybe because monkeys watch. They cling. They mimic. And when the sack is tied shut, it's the monkey's eyes wide and blinking in the dark that are last thing the condemned sees before the world becomes fur and claws and sweat panic. You think about how calm the river must look from the bank. Cool, glassy, reflecting the sky like nothing terrible ever floats beneath it. But below it churns. It takes the sack in silence. No splash. Just a slow roll, like swallowing a thought too heavy to voice. You expected punishment to be public. Rome, after all, loves a crowd. But poenocaliae is private. Not secret, just unseen. The judgment is announced, the sack sewn, the beasts inserted, the knots tied. Then the sack is carried to a boat. Not paraded, just moved. A job for men with arms strong and minds better kept blank. There's no platform, no speech, no ritual farewell, just weight, fabric, noise and water. It's said that the monkey often survives the longest inside. Not because it's stronger, but because it climbs. It clings to backs, necks, anything not trying to bite. Some believe this is intentional, that the monkey's frantic grasp is part of the sentence, that it's meant to feel like regret personified, clawing, unrelenting, refusing to let you face death alone. You imagine the condemned man trying to keep still, trying to quiet the sack's living contents, trying not to breathe too loudly, as if stillness might spare him. But there's no mercy in fabric soaked with symbolism. You thought drowning was the punishment, but it's not. The sack is. Once, someone asked why Rome didn't just execute parricides with a sword. The magistrate reportedly replied, because a sword forgets too quickly. But the sack is memorable. The sack is ridiculous and terrifying and ancient and inventive, everything Roman punishment aspired to be. No one walks past the Tiber and thinks of swords, but sacks. That's different, and so the monkey goes last. Because in the end, every punishment needs a witness. Even if that witness is small, hairy, and incapable of telling the tale except through panic, the condemned man never leaves the sack. Not really. He enters myth. A story mothers tell their sons when voices rise in anger. You think you're angry now? Just wait until the monkey clings. You expected Roman justice to be simple. It isn't. It's stitched with symbols, knotted with fear, and dragged through water until it sinks beneath memory. You try to make sense of it, because surely you think there must be a reason. Wondering whether you're part of the story or just part of the staging. By now, you've developed a strange relationship with the Tiber. You used to walk past it without thinking. It was just water, just something that moved beside Rome like a lazy chaperone. Now, it feels like an accomplice. Still, quiet, dutiful. It doesn't protest. It doesn't resist. It accepts whatever Rome gives its sacks, ashes, memories, and carries them away with the disinterest of a civil servant on his fifth cup of wine. You find yourself standing beside it again, Not entirely sure whether you're early or just unlucky. The execution is supposed to happen today, for real this time. No rehearsal, no confused monkey auditions. The magistrate wants closure. The crowd wants distraction, and the condemned, you're not sure what he wants anymore, if anything. You expect noise. A crowd, some rustling of moral outrage. But the spectators are subdued, not silent, just restrained, as if even they are tired of pretending the performance still has teeth. The man is brought out, still alive, still ash-grey, still moving with that hollow posture that says, I know this won't matter. The sack waits beside him, freshly sewn. The animals are ready. Dog, twitchy. Rooster, furious. Snake, half asleep. Monkey, indifferent. You look at the river, smooth as polished marble. You imagine it saying again, not out loud, just with its presence, as if it too remembers how many endings it's hosted, and how few of them ever solved anything. The magistrate makes a speech. Of course he does. Something about order, virtue, and the Republic's sacred obligation to justice. It's well rehearsed, poorly delivered, and immediately forgotten. The man is led to the sack. He doesn't resist. No one ever resists at this point. Resistance would suggest someone is still listening. You thought the worst part would be the binding. It's not. It's the moment just before the knot is tied. That breath between movement and permanence. When everything is still technically reversible, but no one wants to be the one who suggests it. The monkey goes in last. Still confused. Still small. Still the final punctuation in Rome's strangest sentence. And then the sack is sealed. It's not thrown. That's too dramatic. It's placed. Lowered gently by two soldiers who could be lifting a table. The river receives it. No splash. Just ripples. Just motion. The sack disappears faster than you expect. The animals make noise. Then less. Then nothing. No applause. No commentary. The magistrate says, let this be a lesson. But it isn't clear what the lesson is. You stare at the surface long after the others have left. You wonder how many sacks are down there. How many monkeys, how many moments, how many memories. The river keeps them all. Not because it wants to, but because Rome always needs somewhere to place the things it doesn't want to explain. You walk home slowly, carrying nothing but silence. The next morning, the river coughs something back. It happens sometimes. Rome is tidy, but the Tiber is not always cooperative. A fisherman finds it, tangled in reeds. The leather swollen, the seams stretched. The animals are gone, claimed by water or time. The body is still there, or at least enough of it to be recognized. A foot, part of a shoulder, the outline of a jaw that once looked upward. You hear about it from a baker, who heard it from a boy, who heard it from someone who probably never went near the river. Still, the news spreads. Not loud, not scandalous. Just a murmur, a shrug, a quiet re-entry of something Rome thought it had erased. You expected the sack to vanish forever, but the river had other plans. There is briefly debate. Should it be retrieved, reburied, burned? The magistrate, still puffed with importance from yesterday's performance, insists on decorum. He orders the remains removed. Quietly, respectfully. We will not let disorder speak from the mud, he declares, as though the problem were the messenger, not the message. You expect a procession. What you get is two slaves, a shovel, and a shallow grave near the edge of the market gardens. A place where people don't walk, unless they're lost or trying to be. They don't mark it. They don't name it. But people still find it. They always do. You pass the spot one day. You weren't looking for it, but your feet know where it is. You stop. You stare. Nothing to see. Just uneven ground and a vine that grows too straight, like it's pretending not to know what's beneath it. You think about the sack. Not that one in particular, but all of them. The real ones, the whispered ones, the metaphorical ones. Rome doesn't just bury bodies. It buries memories. The sack was never meant to be opened, not by the river, not by rumour, and certainly not by reflection. But sometimes things float. You sit for a moment on a nearby stone. The sun is warm. The breeze carries the smell of figs and dry soil. Life goes on, exactly as designed. But something lingers. You expected punishment to be final. It isn't. It echoes, quietly, like a cough behind a curtain, like a ripple in a cup of water, like a vine that grows too straight, even when no one waters it. You get up, you walk away, the stone remains. So does the vine. So does the sack, not in leather or thread, but in story, in air, in the places where silence isn't quite enough to keep history from rustling under the surface. Rome has its monuments, its arches, its marble statues that point and praise. But you know its real legacy lives in the things it hoped would be forgotten. Like a bag that once held fear, fur, breath, and blame and couldn't quite stay buried. You're summoned again, though this time not by a magistrate or guard. For the census, he says. Then, before you can ask anything else, he's gone down the alley, around a cart, vanishing like someone who never wanted to explain his job in the first place. You expected a tax review, a head count, a bureaucratic shrug. But when you arrive at the forum annex, what greets you isn't a room full of clerks or ledgers. It's a single man sitting behind a low stone desk, scribbling, scowling and chewing on the end of a stylus as though it personally insulted him. He is the censor. You've heard of them before. You assume they were counters, number people, list keepers with clean fingers and dull eyes. But no, the censor doesn't just count citizens. He evaluates them. He doesn't tally your wealth. He judges whether you deserve to keep it. He doesn't note your reputation. He decides if you're worthy of it. In his presence, your birth, your deeds, your debts, your dinner companions, all are laid out like laundry on market day. You thought citizenship came with security. Turns out it comes with inspections. He doesn't look up when you speak. He just makes a small grunt that might mean continue or might mean I already hate you. You state your name. He nods. Flips a few wax tablets. Makes a mark. You have no horses, he says. Not a question. A statement. No, you say. Your father had one. He sold it. Bad judgment. The censor murmurs, writing something down. You don't know whether the note is about your father or about you. Then come the questions. Do you own land? No. Do you have clients? A few. Do you pay for public games? Not recently. Do you attend funerals? Only the necessary ones. Do you drink in public? You hesitate. He frowns. Everyone drinks in public, you say. Some people drink quietly, he replies, and makes another mark. You expected numbers. You get scrutiny. You expected formality. You get moral weather forecasting. The censor's role, you now realize, is part judge, part priest, part neighborhood gossip with official backing. He can elevate your class or humiliate your name. He can remove you from the Senate list. He can declare you infamous, someone not necessarily guilty of a crime, but of a life poorly lived. You expected a formality. You're receiving a reckoning. He asks one final question. Do you associate with actors? You pause, thinking of your cousin who performs tragedies in cheap masks on weekends. You say sometimes. He writes something down. You will never know what. Then he waves his hand. Not goodbye. Just dismissal. You are done. For now. You leave not knowing whether you've passed or failed. You only know that your name was seen, scratched, marked, and possibly adjusted. And in Rome, sometimes that's worse than punishment, because now you are being watched, not for what you've done, but for who you've been seen with and how loudly you chew your olives. Days pass. Then a week. You almost forget about the censor's questions, the sandal man, the stylus gnawing, the way your cousin's name had accidentally made the room 10 degrees colder. You think maybe it was just a routine check, another line in a scroll too long to matter. But then your neighbor stops talking to you at the well. Not rudely. Not dramatically. Just silence where a nod used to be. Then a client cancels. A dinner invitation doesn't arrive. You walk into the bakery, and the man behind the counter, who once gave you the nicer end of the loaf, gives you the heel instead. No eye contact, just crust. You thought infamy would come with a trial, or a scroll, or someone yelling. But in Rome, shame often arrives as an absence of conversation, of approval, of fresh bread. You ask around. Casually at first, someone mentions the census update. Names adjusted, ranks reviewed, morals questioned. Your name isn't blacklisted exactly, but it's moved, not removed, but lowered. A slide, not a fall. Enough for respectable citizens to start folding their arms a little tighter when you walk by. You remember his stylus, scratching your life into brief, impressionistic lines. Not guilty of anything, exactly, just untrustworthy. Slightly. Enough. You expected a verdict. You got a shrug with consequences. One afternoon, someone finally says it to your face. A man who once owed you money now owes you nothing, apparently. You've been noted, he says. The censor doesn't like men who attend too many funerals and know too many actors. Then he adds, as if offering comfort. It's nothing personal, just reputation. You think about that word reputation, how fragile it is, how weightless yet heavy, like smoke that ruins silk, like wine spilled on wax. Impossible to hold, but impossible to ignore once it's there. You try to act normal. You show up. You pay your taxes. You nod. But the nods don't return. At home, your family notices. Fewer visitors. Fewer coins on the table. Your cousin offers to bring in work from his theatre friends. You hesitate. You almost laugh. You almost accept. You don't. You expected Rome to judge deeds. Instead, it judges suggestion. Your crime was not murder, theft, or treason. It was being near someone who wore too much grease paint and told stories for a living. And you remember the censor's eyes, bored but focused, like someone reading a recipe they don't intend to follow, but will judge you for deviating from. In the forum, someone once told you the Senate makes laws. The censor makes citizens. At the time, it sounded poetic. Now it just sounds like a warning you didn't hear soon enough. You're still free. Still Roman. Still technically upright. But something shifted. And it's harder to know which part of your life is still yours when the walls start shifting away from you. You're called back. Again, this time it isn't for a hearing, or an appeal, or even a punishment. It's for a review of your conduct. Not because you've done anything recently, but because someone filed a concern. No, they won't tell you who. No, they won't say what it's about. The censor will explain, the letter says, which is Rome's way of warning you that confusion is not only expected, it's mandatory. You arrive early, which turns out to be a mistake. You wait on a bench that's too hot, under a fig tree that provides shade only in theory. Other citizens pass you by some nod, most don't. A child points at you and whispers something, probably not flattering. Eventually the censor emerges, not the same one as before. This one is older, slower, with the kind of face that looks permanently skeptical, like he once ate a lemon during a religious festival and never recovered. He doesn't greet you. He just gestures. You follow. Inside the chamber there's a chair. Just one. You sit. The censor doesn't. He circles. Not in a threatening way, more like someone inspecting a statue to decide where it ought to be buried. You expected questions about income, politics, property. Instead, the first thing he asks is, do you bathe regularly? You blink. Yes, with soap. You hesitate. Soap is expensive. When I can. He makes a mark. You expected judgment. You didn't expect hygiene. Next comes a line of questions that sound more like gossip than governance. Do you share meals with artisans? Do you laugh too loudly in public baths? Do you wear perfumes that suggest ambition? Have you been seen walking without sandals even once? You thought the census was a spreadsheet. It's a cologne test. The censor smells you, literally, leans in, inhales slightly, makes another mark. You want to ask what he's writing, but you don't. You don't want to know. He asks about your friends, your cousin's friends, whether you attend events, whether those events include flute players, whether the flute players are paid, whether the flute players are male or female, whether they wear sleeves. You nod. You agree. You apologize for nothing specific, just in case it helps. The session ends with no declaration. Just a nod from the censor, as if to say you are noted. Again. Always. You walk home feeling like a barrel someone's knocked on to see if it's empty. You're not sure what they found, but they wrote something about the noise. At the bathhouse that evening, you scrub yourself harder than usual. Not because you feel dirty, because someone else decided you might be. You expected census taking to be a matter of numbers. Instead, it's a perfume cloud of implications. A sniff, a glance, a silent deduction about what kind of Roman you really are. And the worst part is, you'll never see the results. Only the reactions. You receive another letter. Of course you do. At this point, your name must live on a scroll that sighs every time a scribe unrolls it. The letter is brief. It doesn't accuse you of anything. It doesn't summon you for punishment. It simply says, Your classification is under review. A single sentence, no explanation, no signature. Just the quiet suggestion that you are being considered, not as yourself, but as someone who might be better off rearranged. You thought identity was stable. But in Rome, identity is administrative. You try to ignore it. You go about your week. You sweep the tiles in your hallway. You feed the cat that isn't yours but shows up anyway. You try to sell a bolt of cloth at the market and find that the merchant no longer remembers your name or pretends not to. Days later, a notice is posted. Not to you directly, but in the forum, on the board where proclamations hang like laundry. Name of citizen Aulus Varinus, son of Gaius, formerly of the equestrian class, reassigned to common status pending further observation. It's your name. Mostly. The spelling is slightly off, the patronymic abbreviated, but you know it's meant for you. So does everyone else. You expected a hearing. You get a downgrade. At first you're not sure what it changes. Your clothes still fit. Your house still has a door. Your cat still returns, looking unimpressed. But people shift. Socially, silently, like chairs being moved before a storm. Now when you walk through the marketplace, you're greeted with less eye contact and more caution. You get the leftover fish, the second jug of oil, the figs with one too many soft spots. You ask the local clerk why you've been reclassified. He sighs. Not because he's sympathetic, but because this will interrupt his afternoon nap. He scrolls through a tablet and mutters phrases that make no sense out of context. Associates with performers, seen carrying basket on non-market day. Laughter deemed excessive. You expected law. You get tone policing with permanent consequences. You write an appeal, or try to. You don't know how to start. Dear Rome feels too familiar. To whom it may concern feels too hopeful. Eventually, you scratch out a few lines about your father's service, your tax compliance, your loyalty to the Republic, all the things that should matter. You deliver the letter yourself. The scribe who takes it doesn't read it, just places it in a stack beside a cold cup of wine and a wilted fig. It leans sideways like it already knows it will be forgotten. You leave without expecting anything. You stop by the forum. You stare at your name, your not quite name, still posted, still there. And you realize that in Rome, you don't have to change your behavior to be changed as a person. Someone else does it for you, with a wax stamp and a shrug. You walk home, wondering how long it will take before even your cat forgets who you were. The next day, you're invited to dinner, which should be good news. A neighbor with a clean tunic and a garden full of parsley says, "We'd be honored if you joined us." You almost say yes out of habit, but then you notice the pause, the slight hesitation before the word honored, as if they're not quite sure it applies anymore. As if you, once a welcome guest, are now a curiosity. You go anyway, you bring wine. Not your best bottle, but not your worst either. The table is set with olives and cheese, a dish of lentils, and a bowl of pickled onions that no one touches. Conversation starts as it always does: weather, politics, local scandal. But then it veers. Someone says, "I heard your name was on the list." They say it lightly, casually, like it's not a thing that changes your place in every room you walk into. You smile. You pretend it doesn't matter. Only temporarily, you say. "Just an error, I think." You add a laugh. It sounds hollow even to you. Someone else says, "Didn't realize the censor could do that without notice." Another replies, "Oh, they can." It's all about moral standing. And suddenly you're not a guest, you're a case study. A story being analysed with olives still on the plate. You thought you were here to eat. Turns out you're the main course. You expected dinner. You got surveillance with appetizers. The questions come soft at first, then sharper. Did you know someone in the theatre? Were you ever seen gambling? Did you speak too loudly at a funeral? Did you ever vote for the wrong tribune, or seem sympathetic to the wrong gods, or wear the wrong sandals on a festival day? You shake your head. You explain. You deflect. But it doesn't matter. Because now that your name has moved downward, so has the benefit of the doubt. You excuse yourself before dessert. The neighbour insists you stay, but his wife is already clearing your plate. No one stops her. On your way out, you hear someone say, "He used to be equestrian, you know." Used to be. Past tense. Like a job lost. Like a fruit bruised too long ago to eat. You walk the long way home. The streets are quiet. A dog watches you from a doorway like it's waiting to see what kind of person you'll be tomorrow. You pass a statue of a forgotten consul, his nose chipped, his name weathered to near illegibility. You wonder if he was ever reassigned. If he ever had to bring second-tier wine to a table where people studied him like an omen in sandals. Back home you sit. You look at the wine you didn't finish. You drink it anyway. You eat a fig that's overripe. You tell yourself this is temporary. But in Rome, downward moves tend to be sticky. Like spilled oil on a marble floor, hard to clean, easy to spread, and something people will avoid stepping in, even if they liked you yesterday. It's called the lustrum, a purification ceremony, held every 5 years, sometimes later, depending on wars, omens, or how organized the magistrates are feeling. You're told to attend not by name, but by category. All citizens under review are expected to present themselves. A sentence as cold as it is non-negotiable. You go. You don't dress up. You don't dress down. You pick the tunic that feels the most neutral, not too clean, not too torn, something that says, "I still believe in this system, even if it stopped believing in me." The field outside the city is already crowded when you arrive. It smells like sweat, sheep, burning herbs, and anticipation with a hint of dread. There are booths, scrolls, officials moving like ants with scrolls under their arms and judgment in their sandals. Somewhere, a priest is chanting. Somewhere else, someone is crying. You expected solemnity. You get bureaucracy in festival clothes. They call names. Not yours, not yet. Each name is followed by a pause, a decision, sometimes a nod, sometimes a stamp, sometimes a quiet conversation that ends with someone walking away a class lower than they were when they woke up. You stand in line. Not the long one, thankfully. Not the one for reclassifications. Yours is shorter for clarifications. You don't know what that means, and no one will tell you. You reach the table. A man with ink-stained hands and a bird feather stuck behind his ear asks your name, mumbles it aloud, frowns at a scroll. "Ah," he says. "Not good. Never good." He makes a mark. "Still under observation," he says. You ask, "Until when?" He shrugs. "Until the gods are satisfied." You consider asking if that's a timeline or just poetry, but his eyes suggest he's tired of both. You step aside. The sun burns your shoulders. Somewhere, a sheep is being led around in circles. For purification, someone says. You wonder if it's for the people or for the sheep. Then comes the actual ritual. The suavitarelia pig, sheep, bull, all sacrificed in honor of Mars. You watch the smoke rise, curling into the summer sky like it's reporting to someone higher up. You try to feel cleansed. You try to feel Roman. Mostly, you feel like you've attended a play you don't understand, and you're still waiting for your cue. You expected ritual to bring answers. It doesn't. It brings smell, and delay, and another layer of polite uncertainty to wrap around the silence in your household. The ceremony ends. People leave. Some walk tall, promoted, purified, reassured. Others walk slowly, shoulders lower, eyes searching for explanations they'll never be given. You walk at a normal pace, because anything else would make you memorable. At home, your neighbor asks how it went. You say the gods are still thinking. He nods. He doesn't ask more. In Rome, being seen as under review is its own kind of sentence. No walls. No chains. Just the long, soft erosion of your standing quiet, polite, and exhausting. The old censor retires. Or dies. Or is quietly removed by someone who found his opinions inconvenient and his stylus too opinionated. No one explains. No one has to. One day he's there, circling you like a vulture with paperwork. The next, he's been replaced by someone younger, sharper, and far more enthusiastic about categorization. This new censor believes in lists. You hear about it before you even receive your summons. He's reorganizing everything, someone says at the bathhouse. Wants the Republic to feel tidy. You're not sure what that means. But soon you'll understand. The letter arrives, wax unbroken, as though even the seal is trying to act more official than necessary. You open it. It says, "Your category must be confirmed. Please report." That's it. No details. No niceties. Just a polite throat clearing wrapped in civic language. You show up. The new censor greets you with a nod that feels like it was trained into him. He doesn't smile. He doesn't scowl. He simply exists in a state of judgment so balanced it could be used to measure coins. He motions for you to sit. You do. Then he opens a tablet and begins reading aloud, not asking, not questioning, just reading a list of your associations, expenditures, relatives, civic behaviors, religious affiliations, number of togas owned, and your most recent documented public statement, which involved you saying, "The figs are too ripe this year" at a market stall. Somehow, that made the record. You expected questioning. You got recitation. After 27 items, he stops. He asks one question. "Would you describe your political leanings as stable?" You pause. "Yes." He makes a mark, then asks, "Do you consume foreign literature?" You pause again. "Sometimes." Another mark. "Then, have you ever been present during a public dispute, regardless of involvement?" You blink. That could be anyone. He raises an eyebrow, which apparently counts as a response. You expected scrutiny. You didn't expect a census that felt like a performance review written by a particularly suspicious scroll. When it ends, he thanks you for your compliance. Not your time, not your honesty, your compliance. As if what matters isn't truth, but how easily you let it be recorded. You leave the room with the sensation that your skin is now indexed somewhere not literally, but spiritually. Filed in a drawer labelled, probably harmless, but observed during fig season. Later, someone tells you that this censor is building a new tier system, not just classes but subclasses. Low equestrian, probationary plebeian, civic neutral artisan. They laugh. You don't. You're not sure which one you are anymore. You thought being a citizen was about rights. Now it feels like being sorted by a man who enjoys sorting more than breathing. You lie awake that night, wondering whether he indexed your sigh, whether the hesitation in your voice was timed, whether your sandals, too dusty, nudged you into a different column. You fall asleep eventually, but yes, you dream of scrolls with your name mispronounced and monkeys in the margins. At some point you're not sure exactly when you begin thinking of yourself as a spreadsheet, not in jest, not as metaphor, but as quiet, daily truth. You wake up wondering what column you belong to now. You dress in neutral tones. You speak a little less in crowds. You avoid laughing too loudly at the public fountains, especially if the censor's assistant might be passing by. You used to think of yourself as a person. Now you think of yourself as a sequence of values waiting to be reviewed, updated, or silently erased. You expected identity to be something you built. Instead, it feels like something borrowed and frequently returned for reassessment. The worst part is, nothing feels wrong. That's how Rome gets you. You're still eating, still working, still walking under the same statues. No one throws stones. No one yells. They just notice. Just slightly. Just enough to remind you that the echo of your name has shifted tone. It's softer, less certain, less useful. At the market, a vendor corrects your price. You used to pay 2 denarii for a jar of oil. Now it's 3. That's the rate, he says. Then adds, for your level. You blink. He doesn't explain. He doesn't have to. You stop receiving invitations. You weren't going anyway, but still silence is louder when you know what used to be there. A birthday passes. No wax tablet. No wine jug left by the door. Just the cat again, sitting like a statue no one asked for. One day your neighbour calls across the street and asks, "Are you still equestrian?" He doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. The question hangs like laundry in a storm. You shrug. That seems safest. You start noticing others who shrug. The ones who also walk a little softer, speak a little slower, whose sandals are repaired twice before replaced. You share small nods. Nothing more. not camaraderie recognition. The unspoken membership of the ambiguously observed. At the bathhouse, two men are laughing too loud. One of them gestures in your direction. The other squints. "Isn't that the one?" he asks. "The one who," he trails off. They both laugh again. Not cruelly. Not directly. Just enough to sand a little more off the edge of your dignity. You try to remind yourself that you haven't been punished. Not officially. Not clearly. No fine. No exile. No charge. Just atmosphere. Just drift. Just a gentle slide toward a column that says present, but with reservations. And maybe that's the genius of it. Rome doesn't need to jail you to control you. It only needs to suggest that you're less solid than you were before. You go home. You write your name on a scrap of wax. You stare at it for a while. You erase it. You write it again. You wonder which version they're keeping on their lists, and whether the one you remember still counts. They call it a banquet, but it's really a spreadsheet with appetizers. Once every season, the censors and their staff host a gathering not for celebration, not exactly, but for announcement. Reclassifications. Promotions. Downgrades. Revisions. All read aloud between trays of honeyed cheese and pomegranate seeds, as if reorganizing human worth were best done between courses. You don't receive an invitation. Of course you don't. You're not on the lists that glitter anymore. You're on the ones written in fainter ink, the ones folded into lower drawers, the ones consulted only when necessary, and even then, reluctantly. You go anyway. Not inside. Just near. You stand across the forum, beside the statue of that emperor everyone pretends to remember, but no one can name. From there, you can see the lights, the movement, the occasional flash of gold thread in a tunic sleeve. Laughter reaches you in small waves, like gossip sent by the wind. You expected ceremony. You get a party with consequences. A herald reads names. You can't hear them all, just snatches elevated to full senatorial rank, granted land reassignment, no longer eligible for followed by applause or silence. Sometimes both. Sometimes silence is the loudest part. You spot familiar faces entering. People you used to speak with. People who used to greet you. Now they step through the archway, as though it were a mouth swallowing certainty. On the other side, they'll be taller. Cleaner. More centered in the Republic's sketch of importance. You stay in the shadows. Someone passes by and says, they're reading from the new list. As if there's only ever one list. As if it doesn't change like the weather, or like favor, or like which priest tripped on which god's day. You once believed class was earned. Now you see it's more like hairstyle changeable, judged, and mostly a matter of who's watching. Inside, a crier announces a name. You hear it clearly. Yours. Your name, said slowly, as if to ensure the pronunciation carries the full weight of what's next. Confirmed, civic neutral status. Observed, maintained. Subject to re-evaluation. No clapping follows. Just a pause. Then the next name. Someone more interesting. Someone more promising. You lean against the statue behind you. It's cold. Or maybe you are. Later, as people leave the banquet, you blend in with the loiterers. You nod at someone who might still remember you. They look through you, not past. Through. Like they're trying to figure out if you were ever solid in the first place. At home, you light a lamp. You don't feel sad. Not exactly. More like catalogued, filed. A little dusty around the edges. The flame flickers, and for a moment you imagine your life being read off a scroll right between the figs and the cheese. You expected the worst thing would be punishment. But the worst thing is continuity, the slow, bureaucratic confirmation that you are still here, but only just. You start to live in the margins. Not physically, you still sleep in the same bed, still wake up to the same cracked ceiling with its constellation of mildew, but socially, civically, atmospherically. You walk the same streets, but fewer people nod. You visit the same vendors, but they use smaller scales. You offer the same smiles, but now they come with expiration dates. At first, you try to fix it. You show up early to civic events. You quote the 12 tables a little too loudly. You mention your family history, your past rank, the sacrifices your grandfather made during the war with Parthia, even though you're not entirely sure which side he fought on. But nothing changes. Or rather, it changes too slowly to measure. Like watching bread rise in a cold oven, technically happening, but also sort of not. You expected redemption to be a moment. In Rome, it's more like paperwork that no one has been assigned. One day you run into a friend, an old one, someone who used to share wine with you under the columns of the basilica. He greets you with warmth, which surprises you, and then deflates you. Because after a few minutes, he says, "It's good to see you out again." Again. You never stopped going out. But that's how it works. You didn't disappear. They just stopped seeing you. He tells you about his promotion, some minor land oversight position in Etruria. He says it like he doesn't care, but his smile is too practiced. When you congratulate him, he pats your arm and says, "You'll find your way back." Rome remembers. You don't believe him, but you nod anyway, because it's easier than saying the truth. Rome doesn't forget you. It just moves you to another shelf. Later that evening, you walk past the censors' office. The windows are shuttered. The torch outside is flickering, low on oil. A cat sits on the step. It looks at you like you're late for something you weren't told to attend. You sit beside it. Neither of you speaks. You wonder who decides what shelf you're on, whether it's based on what you did, or what someone said you did, or what someone thought they saw you almost do, whether it matters that you've tried, that you've complied, that you've kept quiet when it counted, and spoken only when it seemed safe. You go home. You light a lamp. You write your name again, this time not on wax but on paper. You underline it. You add nothing else. And you stare at it for a long time, not because you're proud of it, but because it still exists. Because in a city where scrolls can redefine you, sometimes the only thing you can own is the sound your name makes in your own voice when no one else is listening. You blow out the flame. In the dark, you whisper your name once more, just to remind yourself you're still someone, even if no one's checking the right shelf anymore. And now, as the torchlight dims and Rome's marble edges begin to blur into night, you feel the dust settle not just on the statues and scrolls, but somewhere quieter, softer, beneath your own ribs. You've seen justice dressed as performance. You've watched reputation crumble without sound. You've been filed, moved, reshelved, and still you're here. Still walking past temples. Still counting the steps home. Still whispering your name when the world forgets it for you. Thank you for staying until the end of tonight's slow walk through the stranger corners of the Roman mind. If you're still awake, or almost there, I hope the hum of absurd law and soft civic paranoia has rocked you gently towards sleep. If not, if you're still listening, still lingering on the image of a monkey in a sack or a censor's raised eyebrow, just know that Rome never really ends. It loops, it reorganizes, and it waits for your next visit. And now, as you lie there, you know the loop will wait once more for you.